you would open your Bibles to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11. And let's read verses 32 to 38 together. Hebrews 11:32. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they may obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trial of mockings and scourgings, yes, and of chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains and dens and caves of the earth. You know, the Bible not only gives us cautionary tales of those who failed God, like we have studied previously, Korah, Deaton, and Abiram, but also inspiring examples of faith and devotion. We see both men and women who are committed to God, regardless of the condition of society or the culture that was around them that they lived in the midst of. The most encouraging and memorable ones are the ones that endure great sufferings and hardship. Those are the ones that truly stick with us and we appreciate. As the Hebrew writer lists out here, there were those in times past, because of their faith in God, were stoned or sawn in two. They were chained and imprisoned, mocked and scourged. There were those who, through faith in God, quenched the violence of fire, and it notes there, stopped the mouths of lions. And that's the incident that we want to look at tonight. We want to go and notice Daniel, one whose faith that we are to follow. He's given to us as an example and an encouragement. His name is really synonymous with bravery, and his life is put forth as worthy of emulation, that we would walk in his footsteps of faith. Like him, we have to stand apart from the world around us and stand firm when the pressure is on to compromise our faith in the Lord. And so let's go back to Daniel chapter 6. Daniel chapter 6. And notice this account of where, through faith, he stopped the mouths of lions. In Daniel chapter 6, and beginning in verse 1, we want to read down through verse 9 here. And notice that Daniel's enemies schemed against him. It says, it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom. And over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Then these men said, we shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, King Darius, live forever. All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisors, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish a decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. Therefore King Darius signed the written decree. We see here that it tells us about Daniel, and we would have known this about him prior to this, but this chapter really highlights this, that Daniel was trusted and respected. It says that in Darius' kingdom, his rule here, that there's 120 provinces, and each of them have their own administrator who's overseeing that, and over them are these 3 governors, and Daniel is one of those governors. And as time passed by, and Daniel exemplified his good spirit, the king is considering promoting him and putting him over them all. So Daniel really would have a position of prime minister if he was promoted. He would be the one essentially running the kingdom on behalf of the king to make sure everything went well. Well, those other officials who were there with Daniel, the other governors in particular, envied Daniel. So they began to look for a fault. How is it that we can take him down so that he is not promoted above us, so that we maintain our power in our position? So they look for fault. They look for fault in his behavior. Is he conducting himself properly? They could not find any fault in his behavior. No doubt they would have looked into finances in the kingdom. Is he somehow not dealing properly with the king's finances, those things that are under his control? Is he showing favoritism within the realm of which he has some authority? So they could not find any fault in him, in his dealings in the kingdom, in his fulfilling his job, in his own personal character and behavior. They could not find anything wrong there to bring against him. But what they did recognize is the only way we're going to get him is if we get him concerning his commitment to the Lord, because they saw that Daniel had faith in God. Now, it's that faith in God that made Daniel a faithful servant to the king. Well, the enemies then manipulate the king. They go to him, and remember, they tell him in verse 7, all the governors of the kingdom. How many governors were there? There were 3. So they were lying about that. It was just 2 of them that were on the same page here. And there were administrators and satraps, counselors, and so on. And maybe some of those men, and potentially all of those men, agreed. But my guess is they did not all agree, and my guess is they did not all even know that this was unfolding. These are the 2 governors that are going to get this done. And so they manipulate the king, and they tell him, let's pass a law, a royal statute, a firm decree. Anyone who petitions any god or any man for 30 days except you is going to be thrown into that den of lions. That's an appeal in part to his vanity. That they would appeal to me, only to me, for 30 days? There's also a suggestion by the Expositor's Bible Commentary that this would have played into the king's concern about establishing his rule and authority, his power in the kingdom. Because if you remember, the kingdom not long before this had changed from the Babylonian kingdom to the Mede and Persian kingdom back in chapter 5. And so maybe he wants to solidify this and all that attention, and for people to understand, I'm the one who has authority here. So that may be a part of it. The penalty for violating it, as we said, is death in the lion's den. And there was no altering that decree. Their laws were set up that once it was put into place, you could not repeal it. And that was there for the purpose of, be careful what law that you pass. But he does not take very long to consider this, to reflect on it. What are the ramifications? Maybe because, it's only for 30 days. So since it's temporary, maybe I don't need to think this through very much. So whatever the reason is, he agreed with them. He was manipulated into this, and he signed that decree and put it into place. So now let's read verses 10 to 17. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing is true according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. So they answered and said before the king, that Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed. So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke to Daniel, saying, your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. It said there in verse 10 that Daniel knew the law, he understood those consequences, but he behaved that day just as he had behaved in the days before. The enemies were there to report him to the king. They knew this was Daniel's habit. They knew where they needed to be to witness him violating this new decree. They're eager to catch him so they can turn him in. And so that's what they do. They catch him and they turn him in. But when they turn him in, the king, it says, was greatly displeased with himself. They remind him, oh, you know, we passed this law. Well, guess what? That Daniel, he violated it. And all of a sudden, the king realized what has happened here. I made a terrible mistake. And so he begins to search for a loophole. He understands he can't repeal that, but maybe, possibly, there's some other law, some other precedent, some other way I can get out of this and not throw Daniel into that lion's den. But he searches, he searches, he searches. He can't find it. Time has expired. The men come to him and tell him, King, we're going to remind you, you can't repeal this. You need to go through with it. And so the king does go through with that. Since there was no way out, he had Daniel thrown into the lion's den, but he makes mention of the fact that Daniel had faith. He understood he was committed and devoted to Jehovah in heaven. He grasped that, though the king himself was not a worshiper of the one true God. He understood Daniel was. And he said and tried to encourage Daniel in this. He will deliver you. And they had the stone rolled over, the king's signet ring put on that, so that there would be no tampering with it, but someone would let him out. But then we go on in verses 18 and following here. Now the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no musicians were brought before him. Also his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. Now the king was exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed his God. You see here how the king is so very anxious. He could not sleep, he could not eat, and there was nothing that would soothe him. It's noted there that the musicians are not brought in before him. Have you ever been in that condition yourself? You're so upset, you're so bothered, there's something pressing so hard down on you, there is no relief from it. The things that you might normally do, that you could relax and be at ease, have no effect on you. In fact, you don't even want them. That's how the king is. He's very upset. That shows us the king really does appreciate, we might even say love, Daniel. And so he finds no comfort. He finds no rest. And so the next morning, he goes with haste out to the den of lions. He calls out to Daniel, and Daniel responds to him. And in Daniel's response, we can see he has no grudge. There's no bitterness in him to the king. There's no rejoinder to the king. Well, if you hadn't have thrown me in here to start with, nothing like that. He still respects the king. He understands what's unfolded here. The king's been manipulated. He didn't want to do this. He doesn't have an axe to grind with me. So it is that he responds with respect and makes the statement that, of course, he believes in God, but also that he's been found innocent before God and that he has done no wrong to the king. I've conducted myself righteously. Well, in verse 24, we could go on to read there how that the king gave the command that those who were the enemies of Daniel, they and their families were to be thrown into the lion's den. They were thrown in and they were all killed. That's what happened with his enemies. That trap that they had laid for Daniel is the one that swallowed them up. Let's now think about a great lesson, a great principle laid out in this. And that is, we need to put our faith in God above all else, regardless of circumstances. Daniel had faith in God, and that faith was expressed in his daily conduct. We see that as an example and an encouragement for us. And the first thing we want to note about this faith that he had is back in verse 5, where his enemies said, "We shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God." So they were searching for a fault, and the only fault they could find was his faith. And we need to live in such a way that the fault people see in us is our faith. We need to have faithful service to men just as Daniel did. In 2 Corinthians chapter 8, let's notice this. 2 Corinthians chapter 8. If you recall verse 21, where the apostle admonishes this, providing honorable things not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. The Bible teaches us that we are to conduct ourselves in a way that is right and honorable before our fellow man, whoever that fellow man may be, whatever situation, whatever circumstances. And so we think about Daniel being a servant of the king. He was in the employ, if you will, of the king. And he conducted himself in the right manner and looked out for the best interests of the king. And we need to have a good work ethic. We need to be those of integrity and of honesty, so that if we have enemies who begin to look for a fault, begin to examine, if you will, with a microscope, our work, our labors, they're not going to find anything. They have nothing to charge us with. They have nothing to bring against us because we have conducted ourselves well. And sometimes when we have those rigid standards, which underlying this is our faith in God, and we have those rigid standards, it makes people angry. It may make them envious, as Daniel's companions were, those other governors, or it may just offend them, and they get mad at us. But we need to have a faith that stands out. If you recall the Lord in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 to 16, where he tells us that we're to have a certain nature, a certain character. Remember Matthew 5, verse 13, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. You know, we ought to conduct ourselves in such a way that the people who are around us in life know beyond the shadow of a doubt we are the disciples of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. They should know that. They shouldn't have to guess at it. They shouldn't have to wonder at it. They should know it. Those men who were the governors there with Daniel, who were his enemies, they knew he was a servant of God. And they understood he followed the law of God. Now, they used that against him, but they knew it. And we need to live in a way other people know beyond question we are devoted servants of Jesus Christ. Our faith should be evident. Faith should be our fault. But then also, if you go back to Daniel chapter 6, let's go back to Daniel chapter 6. We understand he had that faith in God. They used it against him. They went to the king. They had the decree signed that no one could petition the king or petition any God or anyone except the king for that 30 days. And again in Daniel 6 verse 10 it says, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he knew that writing was signed and did what? He went home, he opened the windows, he bowed down and he prayed toward Jerusalem. It says, as had been his custom since early days. You think about that great faith that he had. He had faith even when there were penalties, and he knew exactly what the penalty was. Daniel was told to stop doing what was right. Now, back in Daniel chapter 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were pressured to get involved in idolatry, to proactively do something that was wrong. Daniel here is being pressured to not do something that is right. So he is being oppressed and suppressed. And I would submit to you that this is perhaps the most common form of persecution that exists, trying to get us to stop from doing what is right. Just don't do it. Back when I began preaching at the church in Shepherdsville, Kentucky, we had a weekly newspaper article that came out in the county section that was in the county we were in. It was the Courier-Journal out of Louisville. We were in the next county down. And that went okay for a while. But then I wrote an article condemning homosexuality. And the newspaper came back and said, you can't do that. We're not going to run it. So I just put scripture about homosexuality and left it at that. And they came back and said, you can't do that either, and we're not going to allow you to publish in the paper anymore. They did not want us to do what was right. They suppressed the proclamation of the gospel. That's a common thing in our society. You look at Daniel, though, when he's told, stop doing what is right, that his behavior remained unchanged. The expository outlines on the whole Bible makes mention that, he did not even appear to change. He went into his home, and what did he do? He went to his upper room, and he opened the windows. He wasn't hiding it. I'm still praying to God. His enemies saw that, of course, and turned him in. Daniel did not go down to the public square and make a scene. He didn't picket or riot or anything like that. He just kept doing what was right. He was habitual in his service to God, and that habit did not change. Now let's go to Acts chapter 4. Acts 4. And what we're about to discuss and make application to may sting a bit. It stings me. It may sting you here. But that's okay, because there are times when we need to be pricked in the heart. But in Acts chapter 4, if you notice here verses 18 to 20, remember Peter and John, the other apostles, have been arrested. They're being castigated by the Sanhedrin council. And it says in verse 18, so they called them and commanded them not to speak at all, nor teach in the name of Jesus. But Peter and John answered and said to them, whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you more than to God, you judge. For we cannot but speak the things which we have seen and heard. Well, they're let go. Chapter 5, they are rearrested. They escape. They're brought back in. They're before that council there. And it says in Acts 5, verse 28, did we not strictly command you not to teach in this name? And look, you have filled Jerusalem with your doctrine and intended to bring this man's blood on us. But Peter and the other apostles answered and said, we ought to obey God rather than men. And remember, it's on this occasion that they were beaten. What's happening? The Jewish leaders are trying to suppress the gospel. They're trying to get the apostles to stop doing what is right. And it may be that we experience this from the government, a company we work for, a school that we attend. And they try to silence us and get us to stop doing what we know is right. You think about this. They will try to get us to stop teaching the truth. They don't want us to speak up on homosexuality or the latest rage with the gender issues. There are companies that will bring their employees in for training on diversity and inclusion. And they will ram it down their throat. You have to accept everyone here. And if Bob wants to be Betty, you need to call him Betty. If you speak up and say, no, this is not right, then you're the one that's going to be reprimanded. You're the one that might be fired. They're trying to suppress you from doing what you know is right. That can happen in a school. And they might want to stop us from singing in services. This past 2 years, 2.5 years, that was one of the big things. Oh, people in churches, they shouldn't sing. You can't sing when you gather together because you're going to spray one another. What's God's commandment? sing, speak, teach, admonish one another. Or, and this is where it stings, you can't assemble. When everything basically fell apart in March of 2020, I was a part of a congregation and part of the group of men that made a decision, we're not going to meet. We will not assemble. And we didn't for a few weeks. Then we started assembling in a parking lot service. Eventually, we went back into the building. But I want to tell you right now, that was a terrible, terrible decision. Never should have done it. The Lord has brought us together as His people in congregations to assemble and do worship. And the internet does not replace that. We need to be together, teaching, admonishing, observing the Lord's Supper, giving, praying, studying with one another. That's what we see in the Word of God. That's what He has directed us to do for our welfare and our benefit. You know, we know there are powers at work behind the scene. If you'll go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, and notice verses 17 and 18 with me. But we, brethren, have been taken away from you for a short time in presence, not in heart, endeavored more eagerly to see your face with great desire. Therefore we wanted to come to you, even I, Paul, time and again, but Satan hindered us. Now, I cannot explain to you exactly how Satan works. I can't explain to you how God works in His providence. I don't understand that. It's not for me to understand. I just know God works. And right here, Paul tells us Satan works too. There's things going on that we do not see that are influencing and affecting this world. Is it beyond Satan to unleash an attack on God's people through a virus and oppressive actions of a government? Would he never do such a thing as that? What happened over the past 2.5 years, was it just time and chance? You think about everything that has happened. There are multiple layers of problems that have occurred or come to light during this past 2.5 years. Satan sowed the seeds of conflict and division among brethren. I don't know if you've known it here, maybe it's happened in this area, but I know of more than one congregation that split during the pandemic over how to handle things going through it. Why do you think that occurred? Do we think that's just time and chance? Or do we see clearly Satan launched a full-out assault on the people of God? You go back and read your Bible history, and you go back and you understand the book of Revelation, the average person standing there in the Middle East at that time, or in the Roman Empire at that time, would think, oh, this is just happenstance, what's going on. No, it was not. It was Satan attacking God's people, and it was more than God's people who were caught up in it. But it was an attack on them. what has happened has exposed a great weakness among us, that we are just all too willing and too quick to submit to a governmental mandate and set aside the command of God. Do not forsake the assembling of yourselves together, as is the manner of some. Oh, you said we shouldn't meet because everybody's going to get sick? Okay, we won't. And again, I was in a congregation and part of the group of men who decided we were not going to assemble, and I was wrong for that. And we all struggled. What do we do here? This is nothing we faced before. I have sympathy. And this is not to say, everybody who did that, you're all going to go to hell unless you get up and repent right now. That's not it. It's to say we need to step back, brethren, and really think about what unfolded and what we did. The past 2.5 years was a wake-up call for us. There is something that's going to come that is more challenging and more difficult. I do not know what that is, but it is out there. It's going to come sooner or later. There will be greater pressure with greater consequences, and we need to make our decision now before we are in the crucible of the crisis, so that when we are there, our commitment does not waver. We are willing to face whatever may come. Now, it could be in the future, okay, you cannot assemble in that building. Okay, maybe we need to go to someone's house, to a barn, to a field, whatever. I'm not trying to prescribe or to say that as the people of God, you have to be here at this time. Whatever's posted out there, you just got to do that. What I'm saying is we can't stop serving the Lord as He has directed us. We need to be like Daniel and have that faith, knowing that the decree is signed, we're going to keep serving God. And there is no governmental authority that is going to stop me from serving God. We need to be like Daniel and be willing to give our all for the Lord. If you go to Mark chapter 12, Mark chapter 12, verses 29 and 30. Mark 12, verse 29, Jesus answered him, "The first of all the commandments is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment." You know, Daniel was willing to die when he knew the decree was signed. That means he knew it was a violation of the law to go and petition God. He knew when he did that, he would be thrown into the lion's den. He knew the king could not just simply say, "Oops, I repeal it." He knew what was going to happen to him. He did not know he was going to be delivered out of that lion's den. So he put his life on the line to pray to God in his own home. We need to love God more than anything. In Luke chapter 14, Luke 14, verses 26 and 27, The Lord says this, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. We have to love God more than we love others. We have to be willing to stand alone. We have to be willing to face the rejection of family and friends and co-workers. We have to be willing to love the Lord more than our own life. We have to be willing to lose a job and face economic hardship in our life. If it comes down to our company telling us that we cannot have faith in God and express that faith, and they say, we're going to fire you, you put that on social media anymore, we're going to fire you, we need to be willing to accept that and not back down and not compromise our faith. Trust that the Lord will provide. Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. We need to be willing to go to prison, to suffer confinement, to be isolated from our loved ones for our faith in God. We need to be willing to die, not as instigators provoking the enemy, but as devoted disciples determined to do our duty for the Lord. Now, I want you to understand that through all of this, I do not mean to make light of the fact that what we have faced over the past 2 years and the virus that was among us was not a significant issue. There are people that I know and love, or knew and love, I should say, that died when they caught it, and there were the complications. I've known people that have been terribly ill with it, confined to hospitals, struggle with it, who still struggle with it now, the consequences. I've had it at least twice, probably 3 or 4 times. So I know that that was a real issue, not denying that. What I'm saying is that even if we are at risk, we need to do the will of God. We can't just simply brush that aside. You know, we honor and esteem Daniel because he was steadfast in his devotion to God in spite of the great personal risk to his well-being. That's why we love him. If you will, open to number 811. 811, if you're opening your books, if not, on the screen, of course. So I want to close with this. If we could ask Daniel if he could do it all again, what do you think he would say? And perhaps you're saying, well, of course he would do it all again because he wasn't eating. Well, then you haven't understood who Daniel is. Because even if Daniel was eating, do you think he would say, I would do the exact same thing? What about those who were chained and imprisoned in Hebrews 11? Those who were mocked and scourged? Those who were sawn in two? If we talk to them, who gave their lives, who were martyred for their faith in the Lord, do you think if we asked them now, right now, if we could talk to them, would you do it all over again? Absolutely. This life, the things of this life, mean nothing. Our faith, our devotion, our loyalty to the Lord means it all. It's oppression, persecution. It's the way of the world. We will face it. And Satan is relentless in attacking God's children, and we must have faith to hold fast to the very end and emulate the faith of Daniel that knew the consequences, yet he pressed forward in his dedication to God. And when we do that, we will encourage and inspire others to stay the course as well. And so I encourage you, I admonish you, stay the course. Keep the faith, regardless of what we may face. If you're one who has not obeyed the gospel, we invite you to do that tonight. We invite you to put your faith in Jesus as the Christ, the Son of the living God, to repent of your sins, to confess Him before this audience tonight, and to be baptized to have your sins washed away. You can begin to live that life of faith, begin that habit day after day as Daniel did, and then whatever circumstance you may face in life, you can face it with a calm reserve that God is with you no matter what. And if you're a child of God that you've wavered in your faith, and you recognize, you know what, I need to be strengthened. If there's something you need to take care of between you and God, then do that. If you need to take care of it between you and your family, do that. If it's something, though, that publicly you need to confess and repent of, the brethren here will pray with you and pray for you that you may be forgiven, and you will be restored to fellowship with the Lord. And that will be a great encouragement and inspiration to this congregation. So if you need to respond, we invite you to come forward while we stand and sing.